Well, good morning to you, Talker. We got a hot one for you this morning. We've been planning this one for days, so have some fun with us this morning and put your voice in. Here's the question. What if a nightmare happens, at least for the Democrat Party, and maybe for America, and something happens to Joe Biden? And just don't mean he's suddenly got a health problem or something else. There's some other things we're going to discuss. What would happen? We've got two super experts on with us this morning, Matt Engel and Vlad Dvadyuk. And we are going to be talking about, well, what would be Armageddon, I think. It would certainly be a huge gift, maybe, to Donald Trump. On the other hand, might that maybe play out the other direction for Donald Trump? We'll see. This is You Talk. This is your voices. You speak. We're all just sitting around a big table together. You and me and some other folks. We're just talking about something unexpected. Okay, this is the proposition. Something happens to Joe Biden. And I'm going to suggest a couple of things that I don't think are even remotely possible. One of them is that somehow, something comes out of the continuing investigation of his son, Hunter Biden, that somehow, in some strange way, entangles Joe Biden. I got to tell you going in, I think you know I have some slight personal relationship from past with Joe Biden. I believe his heart is about as clean as it gets. But people take care of their kids. Things happen. And in this case, we have a kid who's able to say to somebody in China on a phone, yeah, my dad is sitting right here beside me, and he's in this conversation, and he's wondering, like I am, why you haven't paid me the money. I don't believe that happened. I believe that happened only in the wild, drug-induced state that his son was in at that point. And one thing that Joe Biden says again and again is, I love my son. I celebrate the things he's accomplished as he's rebuilding his life. That's a pretty good thing for a dad to say. I'm praying that nothing catches him from the side in this. He happened to be walking through the wrong room at the wrong time, or something happens. There are people, including this special prosecutor now, whose job it is to find those kinds of things. Now, forget all of that for a moment. If something happens, what do the Democrats do, and what happens to the race for the Democrat nomination, and for that matter, for the Republican nomination? Now, who's officially declared? Marianne Williamson. We know we got callers who come in here who very much care about Marianne, and she manages to keep a presence in this polling. She also ran, by the way, in 2020, but eventually dropped out. At this point, 4% of potential Democratic primary voters say they will back Marianne Williamson against Joe Biden right now if there were a primary. The other major voice on that side, of course, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Back in early April, when he suddenly announced that he was going to be running for president as a Democrat, launched his campaign on April the 19th, the numbers got high. At some point, they were almost 20%. And here's the interesting thing. Despite all the strange things we've learned about the beliefs and attitudes of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., in some polls he's still showing around 12%. Where might that go? Long shot contenders? We got a whole list of long shot contenders we're going to discuss this morning. But in the meantime, let's go for a moment. Matt Engel, good morning. You're on the air on You Talk. Hi, young man. I so much appreciate you being here. We all appreciate the commentary.
Good morning, Steve. You really are turning over a can of worms here, aren't you?
Yeah, we're popping off the top, and we're going to dive in with the worms. Vlad Dvadyuk, I'm never entirely sure that I'm pronouncing your last name right, so I want you to take it one more time. This is embarrassing. I have to ask you this. Can you let's put him on the air at the same time if we can. Let's see that. There we go. Vlad, you're on the air. Good morning, my friend.
Hey, good morning.
Good. And again, last time we had you on, everybody was just dancing in the streets afterward. We enjoyed your voice and your mind, my friend. This is a party. We're all doing things together, right? And the listeners are joining in at KPFT. What is the correct pronunciation on your last name?
Dvadyuk.
Dvadyuk. Okay, gotcha. We're gonna stick that in my brain and forget the spelling for a minute. All right, now with both of you. Let's start with the wildest premise of all, that something, somehow, with this new special lawyer, prosecutor, however you want to view him, who has taken over the Hunter Biden case, with, of course, the approval of the Attorney General of the United States, because they've got to be as correct as they can in all this. And we know that the job of a prosecutor in that situation is to look for things, isn't it? And he's got to not only justify being there, but also got to be able to make sure that the Justice Department and himself can later say, we turned over every stone, we looked under every piece of moss, we looked at everything that was in a laptop that at first didn't seem like it could really be the thing it's turned out to be. All those things, we've looked at them. What if some slight shade of uncertainty shows up around Joe Biden in all this? Something where he tried to just counsel his son on what to do. We know the Republicans will be turning that into a major issue, and that's the way politics works. What would happen? Vlad, let's start with you. What do you think would happen to the race in general if something, health or otherwise, took Joe Biden out?
Well, look, I don't think Democrats really have a strong plan B at this point. I think they're all in with Joe Biden. I think once he decided that he was going to run for a second term, the calls for him to step aside or the calls for him to decline to run really went away. And so right now, Democrats really don't have a strong plan B if Joe Biden is not the nominee. I mean, if you look at the bench, we have to obviously start with Vice President Harris, but from there on down, it's a group of people who really have not been tested on a national level. You have Governor Newsom of California, Secretary Buttigieg, and then RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson, who are all candidates for president. You also have Bernie Sanders still in the wings, still the vaunted leader of the left, who's maybe the elder statesman of the party beyond Joe Biden. But other than that, they really don't have a plan B. So I think it could certainly throw the race into disarray and certainly put the party in quite a quandary.
Now let's look across the aisle on the other side. Suppose Joe Biden suddenly disappears. Is that a good thing for Donald Trump? Or does that mean that other people are suddenly thinking, and potential voters are saying, wow, we don't have to have the big guy with all of his negatives, all the unknowns, the possibility he may be trying to run an election, trying to run a campaign out of jail. Does that actually in some way strengthen some of the other possibilities? What's your thought on that, Vlad?
Well, what's interesting thing is about the other side of the aisle is that it strengthens the case for both Donald Trump and the Republican Party, but for opposite directions. I think Donald Trump would look at this as a boon, as an opportunity to run against a much weaker Democrat field, simply because he knows that Joe Biden's the strongest Democrat opponent. But the Republican Party, by and large, would also look at this as an opportunity to actually select another candidate, not named Trump, to potentially move forward not only from the Biden administration, but also move forward from Trump. And I think they would both look at it as a great opportunity, but for exactly opposite points of perspective and opposite opportunities. I think the Republican Party, by and large, you have the other candidates who have filed to run, DeSantis, Haley, Scott. I think they would all look at it as an opportunity to really jump on board and move past the octogenarian candidates and to pass the torch to a new generation.
We know that we don't have any recent polling, meaning within the last 24 hours, out of Iowa after Donald Trump, of course, suddenly shows up. His plane is landing. They see it flying over the fairgrounds while DeSantis, of course, is trying to, as they said, be likable, trying to be very relatable. And, you have people in the crowd in front of him starting to shout, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. Oh, nightmare. I'm glad I'm not a candidate in that thing. Unbelievable. By the way, I can't help but smile. While we were talking about unexpected things that might happen with Joe Biden, somebody here typed on the board in front of me, UFOs. A UFO shows up and just plucks him away. He just disappears. That's a possibility.
That might be the best solution.
That might be up there at the top of the list ahead of something turning up with Hunter Biden. But there we go. Matt Engel, let's go across to you, my friend. You got your crystal ball this morning. What happens if something other than I've got to tell you something. I like Joe Biden. I mean, personally, I like Joe Biden. I think there's a gentleness about him and some other things that in other circumstances might make him seem a remarkable candidate. But people just see him as old. Matt Engel, what do you think happens here?
Well, first of all, I think you're right. Joe Biden is a person of every piece of his history. shows just a very strong character, strong integrity, and a good heart. But they did name a special prosecutor, not a special investigator. His job is to go find things to prosecute, and so you have to worry about that. You have to bring that up. Now, my guess is that if you had a circumstance in which there was some reason to believe that Joe Biden intentionally participated in what are clearly some crimes committed by his son, then you would have a real problem within the Democratic Party in terms of how to deal with it, because it wouldn't just flip a switch. Suddenly he's our nominee, and suddenly he's not. There would be weeks, maybe months of consternation, and I think that the benefactor would be something like a third way candidate, which would be really bad generally and really good for Donald Trump. But I think you'd have a hard time finding a Democrat that would emerge as an alternative. Because Kamala Harris is so closely associated with Biden, if he had real ethics problems all of a sudden, she would have to deal with that. Early on, she'd be defending him, and so I think that would be very bad for her. It would really question the loyalty of Newsom and maybe Gretchen Whitmer out of Michigan, who are two strong people who could be part of a next generation of leadership. So I think it would really damage Democrats, and I think it would really help Donald Trump, because all of Donald Trump's ethical and legal problems would be just compared to, somebody else. They all do it. I think the establishment side of the Republican Party would not benefit. I think they would be stuck with Trump. That's the circumstance in which I can see Trump being their nominee, even while he is facing a trial, whereas Democrats wouldn't tolerate that type of activity on their side, and so it would really be a problem for Joe Biden. So I think that it would be pretty catastrophic if Biden ended up not being a nominee based on any ethics or legal problems.
If we were writing future history for the United States, if you and I had some time machine, we could jump forward and say, wow, this is what actually happened. We would be talking about an absolute change in the way history is going to be written. Harry, you are on the air, my friend. Thanks for giving us a call. What's your thinking about this? What's your thinking?
Good morning, Steve. How are you? I'm glad
great.
You had a good time at the Black Hole Coffee yesterday with Humberto.
Thanks for
So good to see you, Steve.
As far as Joe Biden's concerned, if something happens with him and his son, Hunter Biden, and the criminal investigation he's involved in, I think the Democrats will be in trouble, as your guest said earlier. I do think Kamala Harris has a likability problem, as my co-birthday man, Humberto Willis, has stated on his show many times. And I have three choices. I'm a very progressive person. Cornel West is my first choice, as long as he's in the race. And then I like Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and I also like Gavin Newsom, because I am from California, and I like the job he's been doing out there since he's been governor. So we'll see what happens. But if that does happen, then that could open the door for the Republicans. But I certainly do not want to see Donald Trump become president again. I hope he gets convicted in all this. He's tried and he's convicted, and those lawyers that are with him are also disbarred and tried and convicted as well, because they did a lot of damage to this country.
One of the most interesting things you just brought up, of course, is of course Gavin Newsom. And what would happen if suddenly the whole country was actually looking at him as, what could this guy bring to the game? Because of course he's built a heck of a track record in California. And outside of California, most people don't, at least not outside of politics, don't really know all that much about him. So he's got something. Now, one quick question. What would your thoughts be if somebody began a boomlet for Michelle Obama? What would be your reaction as a progressive?
Well, from listening to Michelle Obama after she left the White House with her husband, Barack Obama, she has stated on many occasions that she's not interested in politics. She just really doesn't like politics that much. She gives her opinions, but that she just said that unless she's changed her mind, from what I've heard in the past, she's just not interested in doing the job. I'm sure there are a lot of black women out there and other women who'd like to see her step into the race. She is likable, but if she did step in, I would support her, but I think that's a long shot. I don't see that happen. Oh, and I was going to make some comment about
Sure.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. As far as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is concerned, I understand that he had a problem with cocaine and heroin in the past, and he's not that really. He says a lot of good things, but he's not a very effective speaker. So I don't think he has much of a chance.
There we go. Good. Thanks for putting that in. And again, we have that ultimate historic disclaimer, which is, if nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. You say that, and generally speaking, that takes you out of the race. She hasn't said that. Nobody said that, but we'll see what comes because, again, we're dealing with a man of some age here, and unexpected things can happen just in health alone. John Henry, we're going to put you on for a second here, my friend. The other side of the ticket. Go ahead. What did you want to address on that?
Hey there. First of all, I'd like to comment about the fundraiser. I think it's real important that people support KPFT. And, I appreciate donations, small donations of $10, $20, $30, $40. But, there are people out there who listen to KPFT who have the means to contribute $1,000 or $10,000. And so I'd like those listeners to think a little big and step up and contribute to KPFT. It's a fantastic radio station. And just to underline that, here I am, a Republican, calling in, talking about the Democratic side of the ticket. And so it's a fantastic service that you do. So anyway, I'll move on to my comments.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Republican. What's up? What do you think?
Oh, all right. I like Robert Kennedy. I like him. He has a very non-interventionist sounding foreign policy. I'm totally down with his stance on pharmaceutical companies. I think they're crazy out of control. I'm not happy about the vaccine. I'm not the COVID vaccine. I'm not happy about vaccines in general. I believe that his lawsuits and his stances on those issues have fact-based validity to them. And I know he has a speech difficulty. It is difficult to listen to him, but I believe he when he talks in a very logical, convincing manner.
Yes, he does.
I don't believe he's an identity politics person. I believe that's the Democrat Party's main problem.
John Henry, do you think this plays? Do you think this plays, and he plays to a loss of trust in anybody, in loss of trust in government, loss of trust in businesses, loss of trust in journalists? I mean, in all those things, those are areas where his voice speaks. Is that what's attractive to him about people like you?
Yes. He is pointing out, for instance, he's the enemy of the mainstream media. You only hear him on podcasts, and he on long form, which is like what KPFT is. It's long form. You only hear him talk when he has an hour and a half to talk. You're not going to hear him on Good Morning America.
No little short sound bites. You're right. He doesn't come off well in that.
It's ridiculous. That's why that area of media is losing so many listeners. So anyway, I have my eye on him, and I'm very, I'm listening to him. He said the race would be decided by podcast. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I'd like to comment real quickly on a few other candidates.
Have to be real quick. Go ahead, John Henry. Go ahead, buddy.
Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom, lockdown city. Look at, what track record in California. People are leaving California. You have homeless problems out of control in California. You have incredible taxes. Gavin Newsom is big trouble. I don't believe he'll get very far. And I think the Bidens have a terrible problem. People who've been listening are very familiar with, the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden connection. He's the big guy. It's corruption, and it's a big problem. That doesn't mean people will hear about it, but it's a big problem.
Okay.
And thanks, and give money to KPFT.
Okay, John, thank you very
John
much.
Henry, if you haven't
Yeah.
heard the new Pacifica Business Talks, you can listen to it every Thursday at noon with your host, John Henry.
Thank you for the plug. We'll be talking tomorrow at 12 o'clock on disruptive innovation and the virtuous cycle and vicious cycles that businesses go through. So tune in tomorrow at 12 o'clock.
Thanks, John Henry, volunteer. We appreciate you.
And thanks for having a warm and fuzzy show for Pledge Drive. We appreciate it.
I love it.
And one that's productive. That's even more important. Matt Engel, what do you think as you listen to these lists of possibilities coming past? Who do you think, in the event that something happened to Joe Biden, who do you think would get the momentum? What's your personal?
I think in terms of being individual, I think somebody who has already served as an executive, like Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom, would immediately be credible and have some reach. Some of the members out of Congress, I think, would have a little bit harder time in terms of moving forward. If you talk about the Bernie wing, that I think Bernie is even older than Joe Biden,
Yes.
and Elizabeth Warren doesn't quite pick up that mantle. I mean, it's important to remember that Bernie really never has declared as a Democrat. He's run for president as a Democrat, but he doesn't serve as a Democrat. And so there's really not broad acceptance of him. So I think you see these executives. But I think, though, in terms of category, it would be a candidate who would be able to suddenly make everything about the election, about the failure of the Republicans and the corruption and the illegality of Donald Trump. You can't get lost in debating issues and talking about policy positions. The entire election would need to be a referendum on not just Donald Trump, but the corruption that now really defines the Republican Party.
And it's also, of course, going to be, as it always is, whether we accept or not that it should be as important as it is, the likability factor is still a big thing. Interesting to me that that Elizabeth Warren is not coming up again and again and again in these discussions. But there's just something right now. Her star, it appears, has dimmed. We'll see where that goes in a couple of seconds. Let's go to Al for a minute. Al, good morning. You called. What you thinking about? What would happen? What would happen if something happened to Joe Biden?
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me on. I think the door is wide open for a surprise candidate to emerge from this. Let's remember, Joe Biden did try to bribe the president of Ukraine with $1 billion loan to fire their attorney general for investigating Burisma. So, and we know this story is well known. So there's some morality issues there.
Al, I've got a question. Some people would say, and of course this was a discussion long before this became something in politics, but when it actually happened, the discussion in Ukraine and the discussion elsewhere was that's not why we asked for that prosecutor or that attorney general, how you want to consider him in the terms of Ukraine, but he was being opposed precisely because he would not go after the corruption in the country. He was considered to be a person who actually was arguably corrupt himself, and he was replaced for that reason, not because he was a threat to Hunter Biden. Long before anybody knew that Hunter Biden even was a player here.
This is true. It was his prosecutors that were under him, his deputies that wanted to investigate Burisma, and the guy was actually holding them back, which at the time Hunter Biden was on the board of directors making $50,000 a month. It just doesn't pass the sniff test.
The look is not good, is it? Al, thanks for putting your voice in. We appreciate it. Thanks for getting involved in this conversation as a listener. That's incredibly.
Doors wide open for a candidate, Marianne Williamson for president.
And I'm about to go to Will in a minute, and I figure he's got a couple of things to say about that now. Vlad, taking what Matt said a second ago about what might be happening, thoughts again on your mind. Who do you think leaps forward at this point on the Democrat side, and who do you think benefits on the Republican side? Is there anybody other than Trump that would benefit from Biden disappearing from the active candidate list? Vlad, you're on, my friend. Do we have him up? We do.
Hey, yeah, I think DeSantis benefits immediately from the departure of Biden because it becomes a case really of presenting his perspective, his agenda, and contrasting himself with Trump rather than having to try to run against both of them. Because right now DeSantis is kind of in a little bit of a pickle with regard to not only having to run against Biden, the Democrat incumbent and nominee, but also against the front runner on the GOP side. So he has to run a two-front race. This would actually shift all of his energy to one angle, which would be just really distinguish himself from Trump and differentiating himself in that regard. On the Democrat side, I really think that if for some reason Joe Biden were to suddenly disappear, I agree with your previous caller that Kamala Harris is just not likable, just does not inspire, does not have the support among the Democrat voters. She never won a single primary that she ran in. She finished dead last in almost every single one of them. She was a candidate who was selected as a way of unifying some elements of that party's divisiveness that was experienced during the primary, and it was a way of kind of closing that door. But I think really the only candidate, and I agree with your other caller who said that Senator Warren just does not have that reach, and Senator Sanders is so old and has never actually identified as a Democrat, even though he runs as a Democrat. I think the only candidate who really emerges as a potential replacement for Joe Biden is Governor Newsom of California. And he's been running a shadow presidential campaign for months and building his brand among the party's national base, just in case Democrats do decide to either throw the incumbent overboard. But one of the problems that he has is that his core component, his strategy, has been basically to just attack red state governors, especially Ron DeSantis. And he's tried to build this case attacking Republican governors without really having a whole lot to stand on. I mean, his management of California has been utter failure.
Vlad, I'm going to go back for a second to Sandy in just a moment, but I want to ask you one quick question. Looking at that likability factor we've been talking about, okay, we're going to take that back. We're going to be going to Marlo here. In that question of the likability factor, people who've been watching it closely in Iowa, and I suspect you have much more than I have been, say that there's actually been a change in the way that our Florida governor is campaigning, that somehow he seems to be, something's happening. This thing, people have talked to him in the past as being a distant person, almost a dictator in the way he handled himself in Florida. He has a lot of people who should have been backing him right now, but in fact are out of fear or otherwise are backing Trump. But is he beginning to change? The people on the streets in Iowa say, well, maybe he's starting to move to a whole different personality here. And, of course, his staff is saying, we don't want to peak early. If we're going to change, if there's going to be a different aspect to Mr. DeSantis, we want it to show up as we get closer to the actual primaries, not here, months in advance. What's your thought on that? Do we see any changes coming in DeSantis?
I think we're seeing a change, which is a natural one for anyone who runs for national office or in a higher office in an entirely different faith. Ron DeSantis was well known to Florida voters. I mean, he served in Congress for an extended period of time. They knew who he was. He ran for governor multiple times these past two terms, and he's done well. He's introduced himself. This is an entirely new audience that he has to reach. And so there's going to be some awkwardness there. There's going to be some bumps on the road. And so finding that voice, finding ways to talk to people who are not all Floridians, which is where his strength has been, is going to take some time. Obviously, now we're in 2023. We're 6 months away, 4 months away from the first race in the primary. We're about a month away from we're about a week away from the first debate. So Governor DeSantis has really been working to find that voice, to see how he can really drive home his message of leadership to those voters that he's starting to introduce himself to. And really, he's doing a really good job by painting that contrast between himself and those on the opposite side of the aisle. Certainly President Biden and people like Governor Newsom. I mean, you look at the contrast between a state like Florida and California. California lost 700,000 people from April to July 2022. From April 2020 to July 2022, and Florida gained 800,000 people in that time frame. There's reason why your caller even mentioned how California is being poorly run and people are leaving as an exodus. I mean, Gavin Newsom ran San Francisco for years. We look at San Francisco now, and it's become a chaotic disaster as businesses are fleeing and the streets are turning into sewers. But Governor DeSantis has an opportunity to paint that contrast between himself and what the Democrat side offers, and he has that opportunity now.
One of his staffers in Iowa said something kind of interesting. They said, this may be happening partly because he's getting so tired, he can't be pointed at this point. He's really been used to being, for the first time politically in his life, immersed in people. In a marketplace where this is retail politics that counts in Iowa, you got to be able to get down with the kids and kiss the babies and hug the ladies and make room for the grandmothers coming past, and above all, be immersed in people. And that this is changing in some ways who he is, along with just this sense of exhaustion that he's immersed in people, and it's somehow changing how he works as a politician. We'll see where that goes. Particular unusual. Rance, you are on. It's a name I haven't seen before. So you said you had one quick comment. Go ahead. What's up? You're on the air.
Yes, sir. I'll put something out. It's probably kind of late, and I'll hang up.
No, you're fine.
This situation you talked about reminded me of something in the past when he said, when the answer was, let the system take care of it, not justice. Remember the line, family values, teach Neil not to steal?
Go ahead.
Are you talking about Neil Bush?
Yes.
Keep going, Rance.
Interesting. Well, there was a situation that Neil Bush was facing some type of seems like it was similar to this, and George Bush Senior said, let the situation, but it was like that Neil Bush was facing a lot of supposedly criminal allegations or something, but it was a while back. But it sounds very similar to this situation.
Of course, we get back to this question of the Republican allegation, which is a good line. The Joe Biden crime family. That's for people who want to believe in it. I think that's a powerful word. I don't see any signs myself yet, but then I reckon. Where do you see? Do you see signs of criminality in Joe Biden and in the family?
Right. No, I really haven't kept up with it too much. This too old and not too much. I just remember it was out there.
It's happened before.
Big discussion for a long time, but it seemed like it went away as fast as it came up.
It did.
It sure was a long time ago.
It is, and I'm glad you got a memory, brought that one back. Rance, thanks for giving us a call this morning.
Hey, thank you.
Will, I'm going to give you a quick moment here because I have a funny feeling there's something about you and Marianne that you want to bring up here because I know who you are emotionally in favor of. You still got that feeling? Still got that warmth?
Well, actually, we're talking about Joe Biden, and if he weren't to run, I think it would be great for Democrats. I think that he's unpopular even among his own party. Most people in this party don't want him to run. I think that it would really open the doors for somebody, and it would really open the doors. I think actually there would be a serious policy conversation, and there's a yearning within the actual rank and file members of this party for an agenda like Bernie Sanders' agenda. That's why even as an independent, he nearly won, and it took an unprecedented alliance of all the other candidates to defeat him. And so I think that, you could see somebody like AOC or Rashida Tlaib actually doing really, really well. I think they would actually have the advantage over basically insiders like Gretchen Whitmer, who ran against a Medicare for All candidate to become governor. Right. I think that would make it really, really hard for her. And
well,
I think that
keep going, my friend. We're having a mix this morning. Of course, at the same time, we're trying to leave plenty of time for the fundraising. So I'm going to cut you short on that one. So we'll go back to Matt Engel for a second. Matt, the ultimate nightmare here, of course, if anything, weakened Joe Biden is the move again to a third party, as we have the question of our West Virginia senator, maybe other people stepping in. We already have a couple of other candidates who are declared as possible alternatives to the Republicans and the Democrats. What do you think about that? Where do you think the danger is? And okay, let's deal with that issue. Is if something happens to Joe Biden, for people who just joined us, where we started off this morning is what happens with Joe Biden. What happens if something happens to Joe Biden we can't predict? Something just turns up somehow in the investigation of Hunter Biden that shadows his integrity a little bit. What if something health-wise turns up and suddenly Joe Biden is not a viable candidate? What kind of turmoil does this create? And what kind of future does it create? Matt, back to you. What about the third-party factor?
Well, I certainly think that it would encourage and invigorate the whole third way movement, which, of course, would play right into the hands of Donald Trump. Because I think it is possible that Democrats could move far to the left in terms of what they're looking at, and if they didn't go with an executive type like Gretchen Whitmer or like Newsom, I could see them go on a more ideological path, and that would again embolden the whole third way movement to nominate somebody who would then really bleed off of the Democratic coalition. Democrats win with a coalition that's not only racial, but it's ideological. We win with liberals, moderates, and even some fair-minded conservatives. And if you allow that coalition to be broken up, it helps the Republicans and invigorates a third-way movement. Again, it's exactly the scenario that Donald Trump would need. I don't think that Ron DeSantis benefits at all. I think that cooked, and I believe that he would fade away. Donald Trump has a lot of legal problems, but it's unlikely that by the time we get to the 2024 election, that will have resolved itself. Even if he's been convicted, there will be appeals that would have kept him out of jail. And so I think that Democrats would be faced with an extraordinary challenge if Joe Biden suddenly couldn't run.
If Senator Manchin, if he does in fact change parties or change his affiliation from Democrat to Independent, is that discouraging to moderate Democrats who still ultimately make up most of the party, and to the appeal to middle of the range independents and so on? Would the loss of Joe Manchin be a significant blow against Democrats going into a strong Republican Party right now? Any thoughts on that?
I don't think Manchin just switching parties or moving to independent, just him doing that, I don't think that harms Democrats significantly. It's not going to change the way he votes. He's going to vote the same way. He's from a state that's overwhelmingly Republican. It's extraordinary that he serves as a Democrat now. I think the real damage would be if he emerged as a third party or a third way candidate running nationally. That would do real damage.
And people are certainly appealing to his ego and a lot of other ways to try to draw him into making that move. We'll see. Boy, that alone can make a huge change. But again, back to the question, the choice at this point is Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. That appears to be the election. Something may change, but that's how it is right now. Vlad, back to you. This is probably going to be the last word you're going to say, because we're going to be going back into some fundraising for a minute, right, to wrap this up. As you've been speculating, you've been very kind this morning to join us on some short notice, just speculating wildly, what do you see could go wrong, go crazy, throw all of this into confusion? What happens if there's some kind of an unexpected health issue with Donald Trump? If you've been watching him as he tours those sites at the Iowa State Fair, he's looking awful old. He's looking kind of weak. It's not looking like the Donald Trump we see at his strongest. What are you thinking about this?
Yeah, I think if something were to happen with Trump, I think that would certainly throw the GOP side a whole lot of new energy and invigoration. I think you'd see the dark horse candidates and the other challengers really ramp up their intent to try to get that nomination. I think you'd see them far more often try really directly challenging each other, not just waiting for opportunities, but creating opportunities. I think you'd see a far more lackluster approach on the left side, on the Democrat side. I think they're counting on Donald Trump to be the nominee. I think Joe Biden really does not want to have to face somebody who's not named Donald Trump, because I think he knows that his record is not as strong as what he was hoping would be, and he was counting on having the ability to challenge Trump. I think
one quick question, Vlad. If something happens to Donald Trump, where does the extreme right wing, the MAGA, where does that part of the party go?
I think you're going to see. I think you start to see MAGA splinter and really go diverse ways. I think you see some going with Vivek Ramaswamy. I think you see some of them going with DeSantis. I think you see some of them trying to form a third party, or maybe even splinter off and refuse to participate. I think MAGA has shrunk over time. It's not nearly the way it was between 2016 and 2020.
Okay, there comes that theme song. They're wiping us out here. But thank you for being here, Vlad Davidic. Thanks for joining us this morning. Matt Angle, and we're going to go to Marlowe.